Come on in and let's talk about chapter 1 and chapter 3 for this unit. Welcome to positive psychology, and I want to give you a little bit of an overview about what it is. There are components of positive psychology that are different from other subdisciplines in psychology. Like all subdisciplines, we have a scientific and, in this case, an applied approach. Applied meaning we want to see how it directly affects people in their environments. Positive psychology is all about uncovering human strengths and keeping cultural context in mind so that we don't pathologize certain cultures for behaving in certain ways. And it's all about promoting positive functioning. When we talk about building strength, it's helpful to remember where psychology has come from. We had several missions, and there was to really help ameliorate or make better people who weren't doing very well, especially in the World War. Post World War II, there was a shift towards researching pathology because we had all these young men coming back with post-traumatic stress and other disorders, and we wanted to help them. This led to the creation of the Veterans Administration, the VA, and the National Institute of Mental Health. But our neglected missions were that we saw humans as passive, that they weren't active in how they were feeling, and we took that medical model to repair damage rather than nurturing necessarily what's best within ourselves. So our forgotten mission has really been about how to build strength, resiliency, and health in young people. And this helps us resist mental illness, to become more resilient to life's up and down, to help practitioners amplify and recognize strengths, meaning we find the strengths in people and help raise them up and help increase people's awareness about those. And through this, clients can also become physically healthier. We want to go from the negative to the positive. This course is going to ask you to really refocus. We look a lot with what's wrong in psychology, but here we're trying to look at what's right. And the book talked about a positive newspaper story about flights being delayed and how passengers reacted in a really positive manner and used a variety of healthy coping strategies. And people who read these stories loved it. They responded with praise. They wanted more stories like that. So people do want to hear and see about the good in others. This is all about a balanced, more complete view of human functioning. Again, it's tempting to solely focus on the good or the bad, and we tend, as psychologists, to have focused on pathology model. In other words, what's wrong in you? What's going on in you that's creating this problem, rather than looking at the cultural context or what's going on in the context that might be contributing, or what strengths do you have to bring to this challenge. And it's operated within a particular set of circumstances at that time, and we want to have a more balanced view. The previous portrayal as just looking at bad or even just looking at the good is incomplete. So we need to look at both sides, weaknesses and strengths, and really improve our cultural competence, especially in the United States when we're talking about working with really diverse populations, and we've seen that come to the fore. It's important to recognize the cultural backgrounds of folks. And we need to really embrace the positive and the negative. The reality negotiates and social constructions of how we think about ourselves in the world. And positive psychology and the pathology, they share similar goals. We want people to be better, to flourish, to do well. And it's important we embrace both of these perspectives. Martin Seligman, you'll learn about him in this course. He's really initiated the most recent push that has created the subdiscipline of positive psychology. And it is important that we focus on logic and science as we come up with recommendations, so we don't end up in some pseudo-science pop psychology that might sound good but has no empirical basis for working. And we always need to look at the context. So that's sort of an introduction to what positive psychology is about. And as we think about this book, it's broken into 8 parts, and we have 8 weeks of the course. So we are looking at it in that way. We're first sort of understanding positive psychology, then we're going to look at it in context, look at those emotional states and processes, and then think about how we think about it, cognitive states, and pro-social behavior before we move into the last parts about understanding and changing human behavior and environments and strengths in others. I encourage you to take a look at the table of contents and think about what ideas look attractive to you, what chapters look the most interesting to you as you start to think about the area for your small research paper. There's personal mini experiments in this book, and I'm asking you to do a number of those as you go through the course. And it's really about learning to use positive psychology in your life. And it's similar to research and also homework that folks give clients in mental health counseling when they take a positive psychology perspective. Some of them are also life enhancement strategies. And a lot of researchers have studied these big realms of life, love, work, and play. And I want you to experience some of that as well. Previous cultures have emphasized virtues. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. And so we want to be able to look at that as well when we think about this big picture. Well, that's what the chapter 1 is all about. And I hope this has helped clarify it for you. Chapter 3 then is all about how do we start to classify and measure strengths and positive outcomes. That's a big focus of this course. We have a classification system. Menninger first suggested development of a new diagnostic system. We better understand weaknesses and strengths. And we use the diagnostic statistical manual in psychology to diagnose problems. Well, we've also classified strengths, and a couple of ways are talked about in this chapter. One is Gallup's Clifton Strengths Finder. You might have heard about this. Clifton emphasized talents. You might have read the book about this or even taken the Strengths Finder. Success in this classification is related to your talents and strengths, and the 2.0 version has 34 themes. The VIA is the other classifications of strengths, and I want you to become very familiar with the VIA, the virtues in action, because it also provides a common language of strengths. You'll take that as one of the assessments. It's a free inventory. The Clifton Strengths Finder you have to pay for. There are 6 overarching values, and I want you to memorize those values because you're going to need it when you look at the movie later in the course and write the movie thought paper. So there's these 6 overarching values, and underneath each value sit these strengths. And it's created in response to questions. Another way we classify and measure strengths is with the 40 developmental assets. And this one is for youth. What protects children from today's problems? So we call these protective factors. And it looks at positive experiences and qualities and identifies 20 internal, meaning inside you, and 20 external. They reside outside of the person in their community or family assets. And assets are another way to think of strengths. There's some issues of equivalence, meaning does the idea of courage mean the same thing in the United States as it would mean in France or Australia or Namibia? And in terms of using that for measuring psychological strength, often these measures have taken a Western framework, and it's not clear that there's linguistic equivalence, meaning the word would be translated in the same way in another language. There's also the idea of conceptual equivalence. So does something like courage or bravery conceptually mean the same thing in different cultures? So while it's important we continue to study and we classify and measure these strengths, there are some limitations to those. Now, the virtues in action in particular looked at world religions and looked at a number of texts across cultures. But again, we always want to think about, is this equivalent? The idea is about positive outcomes for everyone and these dimensions of well-being. So as we start to unpack happiness, what does that mean? It's subjective, meaning it varies by each person. I might look at something and say happiness is this, and you might say it's something else. But there's also objective. So there's some similarities in what people say. And we want to be able to measure both of those. And we think about well-being, we want to think of the emotional part of that, just sort of my momentary mood, my psychological, how I'm feeling about it, and social, how am I interacting with others. The opposite of flourishing, meaning you're doing as well as you possibly can, is languishing. You're not doing so well. And so we want to think about how can we promote flourishing, not just get rid of languishing. And as we move towards a better understanding of positive outcomes, we want to think of those associated with love, some of these big realms in our life. Agape is spiritual love, love we might have for God. Romantic or eros love, so that quickening of pulse and excitement. These areas need some more research as we think about these positive outcomes. There's also positive outcomes related to other domains in our life, school, work, and civic contributions. So positive schooling is an environment where people can flourish and have gainful employment. We focus also on civic contributions and development. That's something we focus on a lot at Campbell. A life with meaning, what does that mean? And multicultural competence. In other words, being able to work with people who are different than you might be so that they can flourish and be successful as well. As another dimension or big domain or realm of life is play, the leisure time. And again, we want to have a better understanding about, well, what are the social, emotional, physical skills that help us enjoy play? Play in adulthood is undervalued. Too many of us do this and veg out. That is not play. But again, we need more research in some of these areas. So I hope this helps you pull together how we can classify strengths and those big three measures. Make sure you understand what they are as you take one of them, the VIA.